Welcome back. You are with Newsnight. Soon the return of Hugo Chavez, battling cancer but still in charge in Venezuela. But first, you don't hear all that much about the two-state solution these days. The chances of Israelis and Palestinians reaching a settlement to respect each other's rights to their own lands is waylaid by conflict and political deadlock. As always, both sides point the finger at each other. Israel says its people are under constant attack by rockets from Gaza and that the Palestinians are simply not partners for peace. Palestinian leaders in Gaza and the West Bank say Israeli settlement building is making a mockery of any chance for a viable state. Now, indeed, the prospect of a one-state solution is gaining more currency, but that would mean an end to a strictly Jewish homeland. It's certainly a vexed question, and tonight we're going to hear from both sides separately. Joining me now from our Melbourne studios is Philip Chester from the Zionist Federation of Australia. Mr. Chester, thank you so much for being with us. We look at this situation and it appears so intractable. On the one hand, you have the Palestinians saying no more settlements, we won't negotiate until they stop. On the other hand, you have Israelis saying that amongst Palestinians they don't have a partner for peace and that there must be recognition from Hamas in Gaza of the right of a Jewish Israeli state to exist. What is going to bring the two sides together and resume the talks?
Stan, good evening. Yes, it is a very, very complicated problem which has been going for a very long time. And to the outsider it seems that it's intractable. And I understand why. You have what seems to be competing interests and conflicting perceptions in relation to the problem. My view is that the problem can be solved, like most problems in life can be solved, by the two parties agreeing without any preconditions to sit down and negotiate whatever remains to be resolved in terms of this conflict. That's what Prime Minister Netanyahu has been calling for some time. That was really what the Oslo Accords were about. No preconditions. Whether you want to discuss settlement the existence of the settlements, where the borders should be drawn, what the population should look like, all of those things are able to be discussed if the Palestinians are prepared to come to the table and negotiate.
And we've seen that that is absolutely not going to happen given the current status quo. I'm going to put some questions in a moment to our Palestinian guests, but let me ask you the questions that the Palestinians are putting directly to you. They say the settlements make a two-state solution, the possibility of a contiguous Palestinian state, simply not viable.
Yes, that's the constant refrain from the Palestinians about this issue. Let me just give you a couple of facts, Stan, and for your viewers to understand. And this is really not well understood. It seems to be very distorted when the media covers it. The Jewish population of the West Bank is less than 2% of the entire population. The area that's covered is also a very, very small part of the entire West Bank. There is not the majority, the overwhelming majority of the area of the West Bank is not occupied or is not in the hands of Jewish population. It is actually a very small proportion. Yes, there are blocks where the majority of the Jewish population lives, and they're in certain areas. But as I said, they cover a very, very small proportion of the West Bank.
But let me just stop you there for one moment. I think perhaps you could be a little disingenuous here, because you're talking about percentages of population and the size of the Israeli state, of the Israeli settlements. But we also know that that comes with the full might and support of the Israeli government, the Israeli military. And that's where Palestinians say it makes it impossible for them in the West Bank.
No, but Stan, if both parties were prepared to sit down, the Palestinians came to the table and said, listen, we want to negotiate a settlement here. What's going to happen to the Jewish presence in the West Bank? This would have to be negotiated. The parties were, we thought, quite close at Camp David. We were talking about 4% or so being kept within Israel, and 96% of the West Bank with accompanying land swaps being given to the Palestinians. This seemed like a pretty reasonable proposal. Any negotiation involves give and take. I think if the Palestinians are saying, no, not 1 inch of the West Bank can remain in Israeli hands, what do we do with 500,000 odd people who live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem? Are they just meant to pack up and go away? if one's prepared to compromise, it shouldn't be that hard, given those percentages and the area involved, to reach a settlement.
Philip, let me turn to Gaza. Of course, there was a pullout from Gaza, an Israeli pullout from Gaza. Since then, we have seen this constant attack, tit for tat. People have said that while Hamas in Gaza have been guilty of firing rockets into Israel, that the Israeli response has often been disproportionate, and the level of damage and the loss of life visited upon Palestinians is so much greater than any impact they have on Israel. Then you have the blockade of Gaza, which were forcing Palestinians inside Gaza into a terrible situation, not even access to food or often medical supplies. What do you say to those allegations?
Well, the first point to make is that Hamas in Gaza has no interest in any negotiations with the State of Israel. In fact, their stated aim is the liquidation of the State of Israel. So when you were talking before, Stan, about negotiations, at the moment it would only be if they were prepared to come to the table, the Palestinian Authority and the Mahmoud Abbas, because Hamas is not interested. So that raises an interesting question, who we are actually going to negotiate with and whether they represent the entire Palestinian people, because Hamas certainly does not believe that the Palestinian Authority represents them at all. In fact, they're engaged in bloody conflict all the time. Concerning Gaza itself, the reality is that thousands upon thousands of missiles have rained from Gaza, from populated areas in Gaza where Hamas fires missiles into Israel. And Israel had no choice, and the world, I think, acknowledged this, but to defend its population. Now, that's a complicated business when people are firing missiles from built-up areas. How do you ensure in a response that you just get the guy who's firing the missile and not the family that's sitting 5 or 10 or 20 meters away from him in the same house? Yes, that can regrettably sometimes produce collateral damage. No one likes that. Israel regrets that if it occurs. But I think compared to every other conflict in the world, Israel's accuracy rates and the minimisation of collateral damage is actually exceptional.
Philip,
people need to remember that.
Let me just pick you up there. You use the word collateral damage, and of course we've seen the images. Are often young children who are in that so-called collateral damage who are left dead. Do you accept that there has been an erosion of support, diplomatic international support for Israel, the longer this has gone on? And we saw that at the United Nations with the vote to give Palestinians observer status. Do you accept that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated internationally?
No, I don't, Stan. I don't at all. In fact, the world response to Israel's defensive action late last year to all of the missiles coming from Gaza was one generally of support. Most of the nations of the world, at least of the Western world, understood that if the boot was on the other foot, or in fact if they were being attacked, if someone fired a missile from outside Australia anywhere into Australia, whether people were harmed or killed or not, there would be a very, very serious response from the Australian authorities, as there would be in any other country. So, no, I do not believe the world support for Israel has eroded through the Gaza situation at all. In fact, Hamas is still considered a terrorist organisation in much of the world. In Australia it is, in the European Union, in America. So no, I don't think there's been an erosion of support.
Can I ask you now, just finally, your thoughts about another potential here, the potential of a one-state solution, where you don't have the Palestinian state and the Israeli state, but what you do then have is a state that demographically would end up ultimately being majority Arab, that would no longer be a Jewish homeland in Israel, and Arabs without full political rights and representation, that Israel would run the risk of becoming a pariah state, much as South Africa was during the apartheid era. Is that another reality facing Israel if a two-state solution ultimately proves impossible?
Well, Stan, a one-state solution is not a solution. Israel was created as a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people. The United Nations accepted that, and most of the world accepted that. A one-state solution, as you say, with an Arab majority would not be a Jewish state, and that is not a solution. On the other hand, the Jewish people in the State of Israel do not want to run an undemocratic state. They believe it is a democratic state, and that's why there is an imperative and a general consensus among most of the people of Israel and most of the political parties of Israel to somehow come to a two-state solution where the Palestinians will have their own homeland in the majority of the West Bank. Israel will retain its own state, and the two parties will hopefully live together. Now, I accept that seems a long way away, but a one-state solution will not be a solution. We need to bring the Palestinians to the table without any preconditions to negotiate whatever they think needs to be negotiated to produce this two-state solution.
So thank you again very much for your time. Philip Chester joining us live there from Melbourne from the Zionist Federation of Australia. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to